Mom, from now on, I'll handle your accounts. It's safer this way. Daniel's words fell into the kitchen like stones dropped in still water. He didn't look up from his phone as he said it, fingers scrolling with practiced indifference, as though he'd just mentioned the weather instead of declaring ownership over her entire financial life. If you're watching this video, give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Now let's get to the story. Claire's hand paused over the teacup she was filling. 64 years of living had taught her to read silence, and the silence that followed her son's statement was deafening. She studied him across the worn wooden table, the boy she'd raised alone, the man she'd sacrificed everything to create. His suit was pressed to razor sharpness, his watch, a Tag Heuer she'd never seen before, caught the morning light, and his smile, when he finally glanced up, was warm and familiar. But his eyes weren't asking. They were telling. I've already talked to someone at the bank, he continued, setting his phone face down on the table. We can set up automatic transfers so you don't have to worry about bills. It's really the smart thing to do, Mom. At your age. At my age, Claire repeated quietly. You know what I mean. Daniel's smile tightened fractionally. People get confused. They fall for scams. I just want to make sure you're protected. Something cold unfurled in Claire's chest. She'd heard this tone before, not from Daniel, but from her father, decades ago, when he tried to convince her mother to just let the men handle the complicated things. She'd watched her mother shrink under that kindness that wasn't kind at all. Watched her become smaller and smaller until she was just a signature on papers she never read. Claire had sworn she'd never become that woman. Yet here sat her son, using the same playbook. You're probably right, Claire said finally, pouring his coffee the way he liked it, strong, with room for cream. I have been feeling a bit overwhelmed lately. All those statements and passwords. Relief washed over Daniel's face, followed by something else. Something that looked almost like triumph. Exactly, he said, leaning forward. That's exactly what I'm talking about. Why stress yourself out when I can handle it? I do this for a living, remember? She did remember. 30 years she'd spent as an accountant at Morrison & Associates, meticulous spreadsheets, catching discrepancies senior partners missed, reading the stories numbers told when people tried to hide them. She'd built a career on spotting financial manipulation. Did Daniel really think she wouldn't recognize those same signs in her own life? Of course, darling, Claire said softly, meeting his eyes with a practiced smile. Whatever you think is best. He reached across the table and patted her hand, actually patted it, like she was a confused child. You won't regret this, Mom. I promise. I'll take care of everything. Everything. The word echoed with weight he probably didn't intend. When did you want to do this? She asked. Thursday works. I have a meeting downtown. We could stop by your bank afterward, get the paperwork started. He was already scrolling through his phone calendar. I just need to be added as a joint account holder, maybe get power of attorney set up. You know, just in case. Just in case, she echoed. Well, you never know, right? If something happened to you, God forbid, I'd need to access things to pay your bills. His expression was so earnest it almost made her doubt herself. Almost. Thursday sounds fine, Claire said, turning toward the counter. Will you stay for breakfast? Can't, sorry. Client meeting at 10. Daniel drained his coffee and stood, already straightening his tie. He kissed her cheek, quick, perfunctory, his hand resting briefly on her shoulder. Love you, Mom. Love you too, sweetheart. She stayed at the counter until his car pulled away, until the sound of his engine faded completely. Only then did she move. Claire returned to the table and pulled her laptop toward her. The banking app opened to familiar screens. Checking account, 3,847.52. Savings, 47,293.18. Pension deposit from 3 days ago, right on schedule. Everything appeared normal. But she'd learned long ago that appearances were often the most sophisticated form of deception. She navigated to her transaction history and began scrolling. Utility bills, groceries, church donation, book club payment. All routine. Then she saw it. A transfer she didn't remember making. 3 weeks ago. $500 moved from checking to savings. Notation, emergency fund top-up. Claire frowned. She was meticulous about finances, always had been. She logged every transaction in both digital records and in the paper ledger she kept in her desk drawer. She didn't make transfers without noting them. She checked her ledger. No entry. Then she saw the second transfer. 2 months ago. Another $500. And a third. 3 months ago. 3 transfers, $1,500 total, that she had no memory of making. Claire's hands stilled on the keyboard. She clicked on the first transfer, drilling into the details. Transaction initiated online. IP address logged. She clicked on the second. Then the third. All 3 showed the same IP address, and it wasn't hers. Her internet provider was Comcast. This IP was registered to a different provider entirely. The cold feeling crystallized into clarity. Someone had accessed her account from a different location. Someone who knew her login credentials. Someone making small, regular transfers she might not notice, or dismiss as her own forgetfulness. Someone who was now suggesting he should have complete access to her finances, for her protection. Claire thought about Daniel's new watch. His expensive cologne. The suits that cost more than her monthly grocery budget. He'd mentioned student loans last year, complained about rent, talked about saving for a condo. Where was the money coming from? She closed her laptop with careful precision. Her hands weren't shaking. That surprised her. She'd expected panic, disorientation. Instead, she felt sharp. Claire walked to the small oak desk in the corner and pulled out her filing cabinet. She spread the bank statements across the desk, January through May, comparing them to her handwritten ledger. The unauthorized transfers appeared on statements but not in her records. $500, regular as clockwork. Always the same notation. Always moving money from checking to savings, not enough to affect her daily balance noticeably. Clever. Almost clever enough. But whoever was doing this had made one critical mistake. They'd underestimated their target. Claire opened a new folder and wrote a label in neat, precise handwriting. Memory box. The name came fully formed. Because she wanted her son, and deep down she knew it was her son, to remember what he'd done when the truth came crashing down. She wanted him to remember the moment he decided his mother was too old, too confused, too weak to protect herself. She wanted him to remember underestimating the woman who had raised him. Claire placed the banking folder inside and closed it. Then she poured herself fresh tea and sat at the table where, 30 minutes ago, her son had tried to take control of her life. The tea was slightly bitter. She'd steeped it too long. She drank it anyway. And she began to plan. Because Claire Harvey hadn't survived 6 decades by being weak or naive. She'd survived by being careful. By watching. By preparing for the worst while hoping for the best. The question wasn't whether she would fight back. The question was how completely she would dismantle whatever game he thought he was playing. Claire reached for her phone and scrolled to a contact, Helen Vargas, next door. Her finger hovered over the call button. Not yet. Not until she had more. Not until she was absolutely certain. But soon. Outside, Mrs. Peterson waved from her garden. Claire waved back, her smile pleasant and unremarkable. Inside, something ancient and defiant had awakened. And it was patient. Very, very patient. The bank teller's name was Jessica. She had kind eyes and a patient smile, the sort of person who didn't rush elderly customers or make them feel foolish for asking questions. So you'd like to open a savings account under your maiden name? Jessica clarified, her fingers poised over the keyboard. That's right, Claire said pleasantly. Claire Brennan. I kept some documents in that name for sentimental reasons, and I'd like the account to match. It wasn't entirely a lie. She had kept her teaching certificate and nursing credentials, earned before marriage, before motherhood, before she became Claire Harvey, in her maiden name. What Jessica didn't need to know was that this account would be invisible to anyone searching for Claire Harvey's financial footprint. And you'd like to transfer? Jessica checked her notes. $2,000 from your pension account? Yes, please. Just a small emergency fund. Separate from my regular accounts. 20 minutes later, Claire walked out of the bank with new account documents tucked safely in her purse. The money would take 2 business days to transfer. By Friday, she'd have a financial sanctuary that Daniel didn't know existed. Now to see how long it took him to notice. The call came on Saturday morning. Mom, hey. Daniel's voice was tight, controlled. You have a minute? Claire settled into her kitchen chair, cradling her coffee. Of course, sweetheart. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong, I was reviewing your accounts like we discussed, and I noticed a withdrawal from your pension. $2,000 on Wednesday. Oh, that. Claire kept her voice light, faintly confused. I moved some money around. For safety. A pause. Moved it where? Into savings. I thought that's what you wanted, keeping more in savings. Mom. His patience was fraying audibly. I'm looking at your savings account right now. There's no deposit matching that withdrawal. That's strange. Claire frowned at her coffee cup, letting the silence stretch. Maybe it hasn't cleared yet? It's been 3 days. Transfers are instant now. She could hear him clicking, typing. Where exactly did you move it? Daniel, I'm not entirely sure. I did it online, and you know how those websites can be confusing. You moved $2,000 and you don't remember where? His voice had risen slightly. Not quite anger, but close. Mom, this is exactly what I was worried about. This is why I need access to your accounts. There it was. The mask slipping just enough to show what lay beneath. I'm sorry, darling. I thought I was being responsible. Claire made her voice small, apologetic. I can probably find the paperwork if I look. No, it's fine. It's just. He exhaled sharply. This is important, okay? You can't just move money around without telling me. What if it was a scam? What if you'd send it to some fraudster? You're absolutely right. I should have called you first. Yeah. You should have. Another pause, then his tone softened, recalibrated, she thought, back to concern. Listen, why don't we move up that bank appointment? Get the paperwork sorted sooner rather than later. Before something like this happens again. Whatever you think is best, Claire said. After she hung up, she sat very still, studying the morning light filtering through her lace curtains. Daniel had been monitoring her accounts. Not just casually checking, actively tracking her transactions, notice within days of a withdrawal. The question was, why such vigilance, if his concern was genuinely protective? Claire opened her laptop and pulled up the account Daniel didn't know about. The $2,000 sat safely in Claire Brennan's name, untouched and untraceable. Test 1, passed. Now for the deeper investigation. The joint account took her 40 minutes to find. It was buried in her filing cabinet under household, miscellaneous, mixed in with old utility bills and appliance warranties. The paperwork was dated 8 months ago, right around the time Daniel had stopped by with documents for her to sign, something about estate planning and making things easier. She'd trusted him. Signed without reading carefully, the way mothers do when they believe their children have their best interests at heart. Claire spread the statements across her desk, 3 months' worth that had been mailed to this address but somehow never made it to her attention. Had Daniel intercepted them? Or had she simply filed them away, trusting that everything was legitimate? The account was titled, Claire Harvey and Daniel Harvey, joint ownership. And the withdrawals told a story that made her stomach turn. February 12, $800, cash withdrawal, ATM. February 28, $1,200, cash withdrawal, ATM. March 15, $950, cash withdrawal, ATM. March 30, $1,100, cash withdrawal, ATM. April 14, $875, cash withdrawal, ATM. Over $5,000 in 3 months. Always cash. Always in amounts just below the threshold that might trigger automatic alerts. Always from ATMs near Daniel's office downtown, according to the location codes. Claire cross-referenced the dates with her calendar. She deposited her pension check into her regular checking account each month. And within days, Daniel had moved portions of it into this joint account, using the access she'd unknowingly given him, then withdrawn it as cash. No paper trail beyond these statements. No way to track what he'd done with the money. Her hands trembled slightly as she photographed each statement with her phone. She'd learned this from a documentary about financial fraud. Digital evidence, time-stamped and backed up to the cloud, was harder to dispute than paper alone. She printed copies. Photographed the originals. Uploaded everything to a secure folder on her laptop, password protected. Then she added it all to the memory box. The folder was growing thicker. Bank statements. Screenshots of unauthorized transfers. Transaction records from the account she'd opened in her maiden name. A handwritten timeline documenting every suspicious conversation, every call, every moment when Daniel's concern had felt more like control. Claire labeled a new document, Joint Account, Unauthorized Withdrawals, February-April 2025. Her accountant's training insisted on precision, on creating a narrative that numbers could tell better than words. She sat back, staring at the evidence. This was her son. The boy who'd cried when his goldfish died at age 7. The teenager who'd helped her plant roses after her mother passed. The young man who'd called her from college every Sunday without fail. When had he changed? Or had he always been capable of this, and she'd simply refused to see it? The moral tension sat heavy in her chest, love warring with the stark reality of betrayal. Sunday afternoon, Daniel stopped by unannounced. "Hey, Mom." He held up a bag from her favorite bakery. "Brought cronets. Peace offering for being short with you yesterday." Claire smiled and ushered him in, noting the expensive leather messenger bag slung over his shoulder, new, like the watch, like the shoes. "You didn't have to do that, sweetheart. I know I've been pushy about the bank stuff." He set the bag on the counter, pulling out pastries. "I just worry about you, you know." "I know you do." They sat at the kitchen table, and Claire watched him bite into a cronut, sugar dusting his collar. He looked so normal. So much like her son. "So I've been thinking," Daniel said, brushing crumbs from his hands. "Maybe instead of Thursday, we could go to the bank tomorrow? I have some time in the afternoon." "That soon?" "Well, after that thing with the missing 2,000. He gave her a meaningful look. "I'd feel better knowing everything was secure." "Protected." Protected from whom? Claire wanted to ask. Instead, she nodded slowly. "If you think it's urgent." "I do." He reached across and squeezed her hand. "Trust me, Mom. This is for the best. Trust me." The words hung in the air like smoke. "All right," Claire said. "Tomorrow afternoon." His smile was brilliant, genuine. "Perfect. I'll pick you up at 2. After he left, Claire returned to her desk and pulled out the memory box. She added a new note to her timeline. Sunday, May 18th, Daniel pushing for immediate bank access. Increased urgency after pension transfer test. Claiming concern, but body language suggests anxiety about losing control. She closed the folder and locked it in her desk drawer. The truth was becoming undeniable. Her son wasn't trying to protect her assets. He was trying to secure his access to them. The small withdrawals, the gradual escalation, the manipulation disguised as concern, these were the patterns of someone who'd been planning this for months. Claire thought about tomorrow's bank appointment. About the paperwork Daniel would produce, the access he'd try to formalize, the control he'd attempt to legitimize. She could stop it now. Confront him with the evidence, demand explanations, cut off his access immediately. But something in her, the strategist, the accountant who'd spent decades reading between the lines, knew that wasn't enough. She needed to let him continue. Let him believe he was succeeding. Let him expose the full scope of his intentions before she brought everything crashing down. Because partial evidence might damage their relationship. Complete evidence would be undeniable. Claire walked to the window and looked out at the quiet street. Mrs. Peterson was trimming her hedges. The afternoon sun painted everything in gold. Her son had underestimated her. He thought age had made her vulnerable, that maternal love would make her blind. He was about to learn exactly how wrong he was. But first, she needed one more piece of the puzzle. One more ally who could help her turn evidence into action. Claire pulled out her phone and scrolled to Helen Vargas's contact. This time, she pressed call. Helen Vargas answered on the second ring. Claire. Everything all right? I'm fine, Helen. I was wondering if you might have time for tea this afternoon. I could use some legal advice. There was a pause, the kind that came from 30 years of practicing law. Come over now. I'll put the kettle on. Helen's living room was exactly what you'd expect from a retired attorney, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, framed diplomas, a massive oak desk by the window. Claire sat on the leather sofa with the memory box folder in her lap while Helen poured jasmine tea into delicate china cups. Claire spread the documents across the coffee table. Bank statements. Screenshots. The joint account paperwork with Daniel's signature next to her own. Helen's expression changed as she read. Her jaw tightened. How long has this been happening? Helen asked quietly. 3 months that I can confirm. Possibly longer. Claire's voice was steady. He's been accessing my accounts remotely. Moving money in small amounts. And now he's pushing for full power of attorney. Helen set down the statement. Claire, this is textbook financial abuse. Identity theft, unauthorized access, coercion, possibly elder fraud. He's my son. That makes it worse, not better. Helen's tone sharpened. Family members commit the majority of financial abuse cases against seniors. They have access, trust, and legal cover if the victim won't report them. I'm not a victim. No, Helen said, studying her carefully. You're not. You're here, which means you're planning something. What do you need? I need to know my legal options. And I need to know how to protect myself while I gather more evidence. More evidence? Helen raised an eyebrow. What you have here is already enough to file criminal charges. I want everything. Claire's voice was quiet but firm. A complete picture of what he's done, how long, what he's planning. If I confront him now with partial evidence, he'll say I'm confused, that I gave permission. He'll make me the problem. Helen sat back, a slow smile spreading. You want to let him hang himself. I want him to face consequences he can't talk his way out of. Helen pulled a legal pad from her desk. All right. First, secure your accounts, change passwords, enable two-factor authentication. Second, document everything from now on. Record every conversation, every visit. In this state, you can record without his consent. She made notes. Third, we need a separate account he doesn't know about. Already done. Under my maiden name. Helen's smile widened. Smart. Fourth, we need to get ahead of any narrative he might create. Power of attorney isn't just about bank accounts. It's about medical decisions, legal representation, asset control. If he gets you declared incompetent. He wouldn't. Are you sure? Helen's gaze was unflinching. Everything you've shown me suggests someone willing to go very far. The best way to justify taking control is to establish that you can't manage yourself. The implication settled like ice water. The forgetfulness Daniel mentioned. The confusion. The gentle suggestions she was slipping. All groundwork. What do I do? Claire asked. You give him exactly what he expects. Play the confused elderly mother. Let him think he's winning. And while he's congratulating himself, we build an airtight case. Helen paused. Are you prepared for criminal charges against your own son? Claire thought about the boy who'd cried over his goldfish. The man who'd stolen $5,000 and wanted more. I'm prepared to protect myself, she said. Whatever that requires. Monday afternoon, Daniel arrived at 2 p.m. Claire had dressed carefully, floral blouse slightly outdated, comfortable slacks, sensible shoes. Hair looser than usual. She wanted to look like someone aging, softening, needing help. Ready, Mom? Daniel held the car door open. I think so. Claire patted her purse. I have my ID and social security card. Anything else? Just yourself. He smiled reassuringly. Claire's phone was in her cardigan pocket, recording app running. Everything Daniel said would be documented. So this power of attorney thing, Claire said as they drove. That means you can pay my bills? Exactly. You won't have to worry about due dates or late fees. He glanced over. It's really just making official what I've already been helping with. That's nice of you, sweetheart. It's what family does. He turned on to Main Street. And honestly, Mom, I've been worried. Forgetting where you moved that money, mixing up accounts, it's normal for your age, but it's a sign you need support. There it was. The narrative he was building. I suppose I have been more forgetful, Claire said softly, letting her voice waver. Sometimes I'll look for my keys and they're right in my hand. In the side mirror, she watched Daniel's smile widen. It happens to everyone eventually, he said. Nothing to be ashamed of. That's why this is important, so you have someone watching out for you. Inside the bank, they met with Mr. Chen in a private office. He reviewed the power of attorney documents carefully. This gives your son full authority to manage all accounts, make transfers, access safety deposit boxes, and make financial decisions on your behalf, Mr. Chen explained. Do you understand what you're signing? Claire looked at Daniel, then back at Mr. Chen. It means Daniel will help me with my money. Right, sweetheart? Right, Mom. Daniel's hand rested on her shoulder, reassuring, possessive. And you're entering this voluntarily? Mr. Chen asked. No one is pressuring you? Of course not. Claire smiled. Daniel just wants to help. The phone recorded in her pocket. Every word. Every inflection. Mr. Chen slid the documents across. Claire picked up the pen, held it over the signature line. Then set it down. Actually, I'm not sure I brought my reading glasses. The print is so small. Could we do this another day? Daniel's fingers tightened on her shoulder. Mom, you don't need glasses for this. Just sign where Mr. Chen showed you. But I want to make sure I understand everything. Claire looked up at him, confusion in her eyes. What if I sign something wrong? You won't sign anything wrong. I'm here, Daniel caught himself, softened his tone. How about I read each section to you? I don't know. I'm feeling overwhelmed. Claire touched her temple. Maybe we should come back when I'm clearer. Frustration flashed across Daniel's face before he buried it. You're fine, Mom. This is just nerves. It's a big decision, but it's the right decision. Is it? Claire let her voice tremble. I don't want to make a mistake. Mr. Chen cleared his throat. Mrs. Harvey, would you like some time alone to consider? Yes, Claire said gratefully. I think I would. Daniel's jaw tightened. Could we have a moment? He asked Mr. Chen. The banker nodded and left, closing the door. Daniel's demeanor shifted immediately. The gentle patience evaporated. "Mom, what are you doing?" "I'm just not sure. You said you were fine with this. We've talked about it multiple times." He paced, agitated. "This is exactly what I was worried about, you getting confused, making things complicated." Claire watched him, memorizing every word for the recording. "I'm sorry, Daniel. There's nothing to be sorry about." He crouched beside her chair, gripping her hands tightly. "Mom, you trust me, right?" "Of course." "Then trust me now. Sign the papers. Let me protect you." The word protect sounded like control. "All right," Claire said quietly. "If you really think it's best." Relief flooded his face. "I do. I promise." Mr. Chen returned. This time Claire signed. Each document, each page, each authorization. Daniel watched with barely concealed satisfaction. What he didn't know was that Claire had moved most of her assets into the Claire Brennan account. The accounts he was accessing held just enough to avoid suspicion, but not enough to matter. The real money was safe. And every word was recorded. That night, Claire sat with Helen, listening to the recording. "You trust me, right? Then trust me now. Let me protect you." Helen's expression was grim. "That's coercion. Clear as day. Will it hold up? In court?" "Absolutely." Helen made notes. "Combined with the unauthorized withdrawals, Claire, you have enough to file charges now." "Not yet. I want to know what he does next. How far he'll go." Claire's voice was steady. "I want the full picture. You're playing a dangerous game. I'm playing the only game that ends with him unable to do this to someone else." Claire met Helen's eyes. "He needs to believe he's won." Helen studied her, then nodded. "All right. But carefully. You record everything. And if he escalates, I'll stop him," Claire promised. After Helen left, Claire stood at her window, watching evening settle over the quiet street. Somewhere Daniel was celebrating his victory. Let him believe. Let him expose himself completely. She pulled out her phone and added to her timeline. Monday, May 19th, Daniel coerced POA signature. Full recording obtained. Subject agitated when I hesitated. Now has legal access to primary accounts, minimal funds. Real assets secured. Subject believes he has won. Phase 2 begins. Claire saved the file and went to bed. She slept soundly. The call came 3 days after the bank appointment. "Mom, I need you to sign a few more forms." Daniel's voice was brisk, businesslike. "Additional authorizations the bank needs. I can swing by tomorrow morning." Claire stood at her kitchen sink, phone pressed to her ear. "More forms? I thought we did everything. Just formalities. Standard stuff for account consolidation." He paused. "Unless you'd rather come downtown again? I know that was tiring for you." The message was clear: sign at home, avoid inconvenience, don't ask questions. "No, here is fine," Claire said. "What time?" 9:30 work? "Perfect, darling." After hanging up, Claire called Helen. "He's coming tomorrow with more paperwork," she said. "Don't sign anything without me seeing it first." Helen's voice was sharp. "I'm coming over at 8. We'll prepare together." Helen arrived with a leather portfolio and grim determination. "I brought blank forms from my office," she said, spreading them across Claire's kitchen table. "We're going to make copies of copies, forms that look legitimate but aren't legally binding." "Will he notice?" "Not if we're careful. His arrogance will work against him." Helen adjusted her reading glasses. "The key is making them look used, slight wear, realistic imperfections." They spent the next hour preparing. Helen photocopied legitimate bank forms, then copied the copies, creating documents degraded enough to seem real. Claire added subtle wear, a water stain, a crease. These look authentic, Helen said, but have no legal weight. Account numbers are wrong by 1 digit. Bank codes don't match. If he tries to file them, they'll be rejected immediately. And the originals? Locked in my office safe. Along with every recording, every piece of evidence. Helen met Claire's eyes. You're sure about this? Claire thought about the boy who'd helped her plant roses. The man who'd stolen thousands and pressured her to sign away her autonomy. I'm sure. Daniel arrived at 9:30 sharp, carrying his leather messenger bag and wearing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Morning, Mom. He kissed her cheek and set the bag on the table. This won't take long. Just a few signatures. Claire's phone sat in her cardigan pocket, recording app running. Can I get you coffee? No time. Client call at 10. He pulled documents from his bag, spreading them efficiently. Okay, so these are consolidated account authorizations. Sign here, here, and here. Claire picked up the first form, squinting. What does this one do? Links your checking and savings for easier management. Daniel's patience was strained. It's what we discussed, remember? Right. Of course. Claire reached for her reading glasses, a prop, and studied the document. It was one of Helen's fakes. The account number was wrong. The routing code transposed. To casual inspection, it looked legitimate. To anyone processing it, it would be rejected immediately. This looks complicated, Claire said softly. It's not. It's standard. Daniel tapped the signature line. Just sign, Mom. Trust me. Trust me. Claire signed with a slightly shaky hand, the signature of someone uncertain, aging, losing control. Daniel relaxed visibly. Great. Next one. They went through 4 more forms. Each time, Claire asked hesitant questions. Each time, Daniel grew more curt, more impatient. Each time, she signed fake documents while real ones sat safely in Helen's office. Last one, Daniel said, sliding the final form across. Beneficiary designation update. Just a formality. Claire glanced at it. According to this form, Daniel would be sole beneficiary of all her accounts upon her death. Not just power of attorney, outright ownership transfer. Her hand trembled genuinely. Beneficiary? I thought this was about managing bills. It is. But we should organize everything for the future. Just in case. Daniel's smile was warm, reassuring. God forbid anything happens to you, but if it does, this ensures no legal mess. Everything goes smoothly. Everything goes to him. Of course, she said quietly, and signed the false form. Daniel gathered documents with barely concealed satisfaction. Perfect. I'll file these today. He checked his watch. Sorry to rush, but that call. I understand, sweetheart. He paused at the door. You're doing the right thing, Mom. I know change is hard, but this is what's best for you. After he left, Claire sat motionless, staring at the empty table. What's best for you? As though she were incapable of knowing what was best for herself. As though 64 years of living meant nothing compared to his entitled certainty. She thought about the years she'd worked 2 jobs for his education. The sacrifices, new clothes for him, second-hand for herself. His needs always first, because that's what mothers did. And now he was taking the last thing she had, her autonomy, her dignity, her right to control her own existence. Claire felt something cold and final settle in her chest. Not anger. Not hurt. Clarity. She'd spent her life believing maternal love meant forgiveness without limits. That being a good mother meant absorbing pain, accepting betrayal, always giving another chance. But she'd learned something vital. Love without respect was just captivity. And she was done being anyone's prisoner. That afternoon, Claire and Helen reviewed the morning's recording. Just sign, Mom. Trust me. This is what's best for you. God forbid anything happens to you, but if it does, this ensures everything goes smoothly. Helen stopped playback. He essentially told you he's planning for your death. Making sure he inherits everything. He's always been a planner, Claire said quietly. This isn't planning. This is predation. Helen pulled out a legal pad. We need to move now. I'm filing a fraud alert with credit bureaus. If Daniel tries opening accounts or taking loans in your name, you'll be notified. What else? I'm preparing a formal complaint to the Financial Crimes Unit. We have recordings, unauthorized transactions, evidence of coercion. Helen looked up. And I'm drafting a restraining order application. If he escalates, we file immediately. How long before investigation starts? Once we file? 2 to 3 weeks for initial review. The bank will freeze flagged accounts. If Daniel's been doing this to other clients, and I suspect he has, they'll audit his entire portfolio. You think there are others? Someone this comfortable with manipulation didn't start with his mother. He practiced on someone. Probably multiple someones. Helen's voice was grim. When the bank investigates, they'll find the pattern. Claire thought about Daniel's expensive lifestyle. The money had to come from somewhere. What do I do now? Wait. Document. Record every interaction. Helen leaned forward. And Claire? Prepare for what comes next. When this breaks, Daniel will fight. He'll paint you as confused, vindictive, a bitter old woman punishing her successful son. Let him try. He'll turn people against you. Friends, maybe family. He'll craft a narrative where he's the victim. I know. Helen studied her. Are you ready? Claire thought about her mother, shrinking under her father's control. About every woman told she was too emotional, too irrational, too old to be trusted. About the quiet strength it took to survive in a world that constantly underestimated you. I've been ready my whole life, Claire said. That evening, Claire stood in her kitchen where Daniel had first declared his intention to control her finances. Her phone buzzed. A text from Daniel. Forms filed. Everything's processed. You can relax now, Mom. I've got everything handled. He thought he'd won. Thought the fake forms were real, thought her money was his, thought she was safely managed and controlled. He had no idea every form he'd filed would be rejected. That every transaction would trigger alerts. That a criminal investigation was already prepared. He had no idea the trap had already closed. She typed, "Thank you, sweetheart. I feel so much better knowing you're taking care of things." Then she opened her laptop and updated her timeline. Thursday, May 22nd, Daniel filed fraudulent forms, unknowingly fake. Expressed satisfaction at having everything handled. Subject completely confident. Investigation materials prepared for submission. Subject believes he has complete control. He has none. Claire saved the file and poured wine. Outside, the sun set, painting her garden gold. The lavender swayed in evening breeze. She raised her glass in silent toast. To memory. To protection. To freedom. The storm was coming. And she was ready. The storm arrived on a Tuesday morning. Claire was tending her lavender when she heard the car door slam. She looked up to see Daniel striding across her lawn, his face flushed with fury, his expensive suit rumpled as though he'd dressed in haste. He didn't knock. The front door banged open. "What the hell did you do?" His voice echoed through the house. Claire set down her gardening shears, removed her gloves with deliberate care, and walked calmly to the living room. Daniel stood in the center, trembling with rage, his phone clutched in one white-knuckled hand. "Good morning, Daniel. Would you like some tea?" "Tea?" He laughed bitterly. The bank just froze all my access to your accounts. They said there's a fraud investigation. In your name. He took a step toward her. You reported me for fraud? Claire settled into her armchair, folding her hands in her lap. I reported suspicious activity. The bank determined it warranted investigation. Suspicious activity? Daniel's voice rose. I'm your son. You gave me power of attorney. You asked me to help manage your finances. Did I? Claire's tone remained perfectly calm. Or did you pressure a woman you claimed was confused and forgetful into signing documents she had doubts about? His face went pale. You're twisting everything. I was trying to help you. Help me? Claire reached beside her chair and lifted the memory box onto her lap. Let me show you how you helped. She opened the folder and removed the first document, the joint account statements showing months of unauthorized withdrawals. February 12th. $800. Cash withdrawal from an account I didn't know existed. She set it on the coffee table between them. February 28th. $1,200. March 15th. $950. Those were legitimate. Legitimate withdrawals from an account you convinced me to open, then used without my knowledge or consent. Claire's voice remained steady, clinical. Over $5,000 in 3 months. Would you like to explain what that money was for, Daniel? He stared at the statements, his jaw working. I needed. There were expenses. Expenses. Claire pulled out her bank transaction records. 3 unauthorized transfers from my primary account. Same IP address. Not my internet provider. Yours. She met his eyes. You accessed my accounts remotely, moved my money, and hoped I wouldn't notice. You're senile. You don't remember giving me permission. I remember everything. Claire's voice cut through his protest like steel. Including our conversation at the bank. The one where I expressed hesitation and you pressured me to sign anyway. She pulled out her phone and played the recording. Mom, you trust me, right? Then trust me now. Sign the papers. Let me protect you. Daniel's face drained of color. You recorded me? Every conversation. Every visit. Every phone call since you first suggested taking control of my finances. Claire set the phone down. It's all documented. Time-stamped. Backed up in multiple locations. You had no right. I had every right to protect myself from someone stealing from me. Her calm was absolute, devastating. Even if that someone is my son. Daniel collapsed onto the sofa, his head in his hands. For a moment, he looked like the boy who'd cried over his goldfish. Then he looked up, and his expression had hardened. You think you're so smart. You think you've won. His voice was low, dangerous. But who's going to believe you? A confused old woman with a grudge against her successful son? I'll tell them you're losing your mind. That you're paranoid, delusional. Claire pulled out the final document, a letter on law firm letterhead. This is from Helen Vargas, the retired prosecutor who lives next door. She's reviewed all the evidence and submitted a formal complaint to the Financial Crimes Unit. Claire's voice was quiet, final. They're not just investigating me, Daniel. They're investigating you. He snatched the letter, his hands shaking as he read. The color drained from his face completely. They're auditing your client portfolio, Claire continued. Looking for patterns of unauthorized access, suspicious transfers, elderly clients who might have been similarly manipulated. If you've done this to anyone else, and I suspect you have, they'll find it. No. No, this is. Daniel stood abruptly, pacing. You can't do this to me. I'm your son. You did this to yourself. Claire's voice cracked for the first time, revealing the grief beneath her composure. The moment you decided I was too old, too confused, too weak to deserve respect. The moment you chose my money over my dignity. I needed, He stopped himself, but it was too late. Needed what, Daniel? Claire leaned forward. What was so important that you had to steal from your own mother? He said nothing, just stared at her with something between hatred and desperation. Get out, Claire said quietly. And don't come back unless you're prepared to tell me the truth. Daniel stood frozen for a moment, then grabbed his phone and stormed toward the door. He paused in the doorway, his back to her. You'll regret this, he said. No, Claire replied. I won't. The door slammed. Through the window, she watched him speed away, tires screeching. Only then did Claire allow herself to shake. The second storm hit 24 hours later, this time on social media. Helen called at 8 a.m. Claire, turn on your computer. Daniel's posted something on Facebook. Claire opened her laptop to find Daniel's public post, already shared dozens of times. I'm heartbroken to share that my mother is experiencing cognitive decline. Against medical advice, she's making false accusations against family members trying to help her. If you know someone with an aging parent, please watch for signs of paranoia and confusion. It's devastating to watch someone you love lose themselves. #eldercare, #family struggles, #mental health matters. The comments were flooding in. Sympathy. Advice. People sharing their own stories of aging parents. Claire stared at the screen, feeling the familiar weight of being dismissed, disbelieved, painted as the problem. Then her phone rang. The bank's fraud department. Mrs. Harvey? This is Michael Chen from First National's Financial Crimes Division. We've completed our preliminary review of your complaint. And? We found irregularities not just in your accounts, but in 17 other client accounts Mr. Harvey had access to. All elderly clients. All showing similar patterns of unauthorized transfers and cash withdrawals. His voice was grave. We're referring this to law enforcement. And Mrs. Harvey? Your son's employment has been suspended pending investigation. 17 people, Claire whispered. That we've found so far. The pattern goes back at least 2 years. After she hung up, Claire forwarded Daniel's Facebook post to Helen along with the bank's findings. Helen called immediately. Don't respond to the post. Don't engage. The facts will speak for themselves. But within hours, the facts began speaking. The bank issued an internal memo about an employee under investigation for financial fraud. Though Daniel wasn't named, the financial services community was small. Word spread quickly. By afternoon, Daniel's post had been deleted. But screenshots remained, circulating alongside whispers about the real reason behind his suspension. Claire's phone rang constantly, Daniel, again and again. She didn't answer. Instead, she sat in her kitchen and wrote a letter. Not to Daniel. To the 17 other victims whose names she didn't know but whose stories she could imagine. I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner. I'm sorry it took me so long to act. I'm sorry you were hurt by someone I raised. She sealed the letter, knowing she'd never send it. But writing it felt necessary, an acknowledgement of responsibility, even for sins that weren't entirely hers. That evening, Helen came over with wine and grim news. The police want to interview you tomorrow. Formal statement about Daniel's activities. What happens to him? If the evidence holds, and it will, he's looking at multiple counts of elder fraud, identity theft, unauthorized access. Helen paused. Claire, he could face significant prison time. The words settled over her like ash. Her son. In prison. Do you regret it? Helen asked gently. Claire thought about her mother, silent and small under her father's control. About the 17 victims who'd trusted Daniel. About the woman she'd almost become, managed, controlled, erased. I regret that it was necessary, she said finally. I regret that my son became someone capable of this. But stopping him? No. I don't regret that. Helen squeezed her hand. You did the right thing. The right thing feels terrible. It usually does. After Helen left, Claire stood at her window, watching the streets settle into evening quiet. Somewhere, Daniel was facing the collapse of everything he'd built. His job. His reputation. His freedom. She felt grief, sharp and overwhelming. But beneath it, something else, a deep, bone-tired relief. She had survived. She had protected herself. She had refused to become invisible. Claire picked up her phone and added a final entry to her timeline. Wednesday, May 28th, bank investigation confirmed fraud across multiple accounts. Daniel's employment suspended. Police interview scheduled. Subject's public attempt at discrediting me has failed. Subject now faces criminal charges. I have chosen my freedom over his comfort. My dignity over his convenience. Myself over silence. It was the hardest choice I've ever made. It was also the right one. She saved the file, backed it up, and finally allowed herself to cry, for the son she'd lost, for the mother she'd almost stopped being, for the difficult grace of choosing herself. Outside, the lavender swayed in the evening breeze. Memory and protection, growing strong in her garden. 6 months later, Claire stood at the window of her cottage, watching seagulls trace lazy circles above the tide. The coastal town was smaller than where she'd lived before, quieter, gentler, a place where she could breathe without the weight of old memories pressing down. The morning sun painted everything gold. She brewed her tea, Earl Grey, like always, and settled into the cushioned window seat she'd had installed when she moved in. The view stretched endlessly, ocean, sky, the promise of horizons she'd never thought she'd see. Her phone buzzed. A notification from her bank, restitution payment received, $847.50. Claire opened the app and checked the balance. Daniel's court-ordered payments arrived like clockwork now, monthly installments repaying what he'd stolen, plus interest. It would take years to complete, but the judge had been clear, every penny would be returned. She didn't need the money anymore. Her assets had been fully restored once the investigation concluded. The pension account he'd raided, the savings he'd depleted, even the joint account withdrawals, all of it recovered and secured in accounts only she could access. But the payments weren't really about the money. They were about accountability. About Daniel facing, every single month, the cost of what he'd done. Claire closed the app and returned to her tea. Through the window, she watched an elderly couple walking hand in hand along the beach, their dog running ahead through the surf. She thought about Daniel sometimes. Wondered if he understood yet. If prison had taught him anything beyond resentment. The trial had been mercifully quick. 17 victims, overwhelming evidence, recordings that couldn't be disputed. Daniel's lawyer had tried to paint him as a desperate man under financial pressure, someone who'd made mistakes rather than committed crimes. The judge hadn't been sympathetic. You didn't just steal money, she'd said, her voice cutting through the courtroom. You stole autonomy. You stole dignity. You weaponized your victims' love and trust against them. That's not desperation, it's predation. 3 years in minimum security. 5 years probation. Full restitution to all victims. Permanent revocation of his financial licenses. Claire had attended every day of the trial. Not to gloat, but to bear witness. To let the other victims know they weren't alone. Some of them had thanked her afterward. Others couldn't meet her eyes, still ashamed that they'd been fooled by someone they'd trusted. She understood that shame. She'd felt it too, in the beginning. But she'd learned something vital in the months since. Shame belonged to the person who betrayed trust, not the person who gave it. Claire's laptop sat open on the small desk in the corner, the oak rolltop she'd brought from her old house, one of the few pieces she'd kept. She'd sold most of her furniture, donated her mother's china, released herself from the weight of accumulated things. This cottage was smaller, simpler, easier to maintain. It was hers in a way the old house never quite had been. She opened her email and found 3 new messages in her Senior Financial Protection folder. Women from across the state, reaching out after reading about her story in the local paper or seeing the community education program she'd started. Dear Mrs. Harvey. My daughter wants me to add her to my checking account, just in case. After reading your story, I'm wondering if I should be more careful. What questions should I ask? Claire spent the next hour crafting thoughtful responses. She'd become something she'd never expected, an advocate, a resource, a voice for women who'd been taught their whole lives to be accommodating, trusting, silent. Every Tuesday, she facilitated a workshop at the community center, Financial Safety for Seniors. She taught them how to recognize manipulation, how to protect their accounts, how to say no to family members who pressured them. We're not helpless, she told them at each session. We've just been taught to stay quiet. But quiet doesn't keep us safe, it keeps us vulnerable. The workshops had grown from 5 attendees to over 30. Women brought their friends, their sisters, their neighbors. They shared stories, some heartbreaking, some still unfolding, and Claire listened with the understanding of someone who'd walked that path herself. Last week, a woman named Margaret had stood up during the session and said, "My son-in-law has been asking about my finances. He says I'm getting forgetful, that I need help. But I balance my checkbook every month. I've never missed a payment in my life." Claire had recognized the fear in Margaret's eyes. The doubt. The maternal instinct to trust even when instinct screamed danger. Then trust yourself, Claire had said gently. If something feels wrong, it probably is. You don't owe anyone access to your autonomy. Not even family. Margaret had teared up. Thank you. I needed to hear that. Those moments, the connections, the women choosing themselves, the quiet revolution of dignity reclaimed, they made everything Claire had endured feel purposeful. In the afternoon, Claire worked in her garden. She'd planted it carefully when she first moved in, rows of lavender and rosemary, exactly as she'd planned in her old house. But here, they thrived in the coastal air, growing stronger and more fragrant than she'd imagined possible. Lavender for memory. Rosemary for protection and remembrance. She knelt in the soil, pruning and weeding, her hands sure and steady. Gardening had become meditation, a way to process everything that had happened, to root herself in something living and growing. Mrs. Patterson from next door waved from her porch. "Looking beautiful, Claire." "Thank you." Claire waved back. She'd made friends here. Real friends, built on present connections rather than past obligations. Women who knew her story but didn't define her by it. Who saw her as Claire, strong, capable, complete, rather than Daniel's mother or Daniel's victim. That shift had been profound. For so long, her identity had been tied to motherhood, to sacrifice, to being needed. When Daniel betrayed her, part of her had wondered who she was if not a good mother. But she'd learned, she was herself. Whole and worthy, regardless of his choices. As the sun began setting, Claire returned inside and opened her journal. It sat on the small table by the window, leather-bound, well-worn now from daily entries. She turned to a fresh page and wrote. November 17, 2025. 6 months in this cottage. 6 months of mornings watching the ocean, evenings tending my garden, days helping other women find their voices. People ask if I'm angry. If I hate Daniel for what he did. The truth is more complicated. I grieve the son I thought I had. I mourn the relationship that could have been if he'd chosen differently. But anger? No. Anger would give him power he doesn't deserve. What I feel instead is free. Free from the weight of managing his image, protecting his feelings, making myself smaller so he could feel bigger. Free from the lie that good mothers absorb all pain without complaint. Free from the belief that love requires the sacrifice of self. He tried to control my money. But what I had secretly prepared wasn't revenge, it was freedom. And that freedom has become something larger than myself. Every woman who attends my workshops, every person who reads my story and recognizes themselves, every voice that chooses dignity over silence, they're all part of this liberation. I learned that respect and autonomy aren't optional components of love. They're foundational. Without them, love becomes captivity. I learned that being a good mother doesn't mean accepting abuse. It means modeling boundaries, self-respect, and the courage to choose yourself. I learned that quiet strength isn't weakness, it's the most powerful force I possess. Most importantly, I learned that it's never too late to reclaim your life. At 64, I thought my story was mostly written. Instead, I discovered I'm still the author, still holding the pen, still deciding what comes next. And what comes next is peace. Claire closed the journal and set it aside. She poured herself a glass of wine and returned to the window seat, watching the last light fade over the water. Her phone buzzed again. A message from Helen: dinner tomorrow? My treat. Celebrating your birthday early. Claire smiled and typed back, perfect. See you at 6:65 tomorrow. A milestone she'd once feared would mark the beginning of decline, of irrelevance, of being managed by others. Instead, it marked the beginning of her truest life. As darkness settled, Claire lit candles throughout the cottage. Their warm glow reflected off the windows, creating a space that felt both cozy and sacred. She walked to her garden door and looked out at the lavender and rosemary, barely visible now in the twilight. Tomorrow she'd harvest some for sachets, gifts for the women in her workshop, small reminders that memory and protection could grow together, that strength could be gentle, that choosing yourself was always the right choice. Claire thought about the memory box, still tucked away in her desk drawer. She hadn't opened it since the trial ended. Didn't need to anymore. The evidence it contained had served its purpose, protecting her, exposing truth, ensuring justice. But the real protection hadn't come from documents or recordings. It had come from her refusal to stay silent. Her willingness to choose dignity over comfort. Her recognition that she deserved better than being erased. Claire raised her wine glass toward the darkened garden. To memory, she whispered. To protection. To freedom. The lavender swayed in the evening breeze, as if in response. Outside, the ocean whispered against the shore, endless, patient, resilient. Inside, Claire Harvey sat in her cottage, warm and safe and entirely her own. She had survived. She had chosen herself. She had won. Not through revenge or bitterness, but through the quiet, revolutionary act of refusing to disappear. And that, she knew, was the greatest victory of all.